Morning everyone, it's Fiona Bárcenas here and I wanted to welcome you to my studio this morning. I thought I'd maybe show you some beginners watercolours, and watercolour can be a bit tricky, but with a few hints and tips I'm sure you'll master it in no time. So this first one that I wanted to show you it's a technique that you use with salt to get a really nice granulated background, and I'm just going to show you on this scrap piece of paper because I've done one earlier in old Blue Peter fashion so that it's dry for me to start. So it's really, I don't know if you can see, oh we're a wee bit out of focus, I'll just go zoom in a wee bit more, but I'm sure you can see it's quite granulated on there and it just gives a really nice pattern. So I'll just put that to one side, and I've got my bit of watercolour paper. I use £300 watercolour paper. I use Bockingford mainly, but I do use lots of other, I love Archers, the cotton ones and things like that, but they're really quite pricey, so these are really good to start off with. So I'm just going to put a lot of water on here, just plain old water, and we're just going to saturate that down. Now when you put in water on watercolour, I suppose it's a wee bit like having blotting paper. It really absorbs the water a lot, and you want it to do that because then when you put different layers of colour on, it absorbs really beautifully into it. So when you first put it on, it's quite shiny. Can you see that shine on there? So you just want to allow it to soak in a wee bit. Now I'm going to put some colour on that, but that's what you're looking for, is this real nice wet. So you really wet it. This is a wet and wet technique. So, and then what I'm going to do is just use some ultramarine blue, which is a really nice sort of basic blue colour, and I'll just sweep that on like that, and you can see how wet it is, can't you? Okay, so I'm not even having to be too careful. I'm just going to go like that, and I've always got some kitchen roll handy just to give it a wipe when you're using watercolour paper. Now, depending on how granulated you want this to be, and I think you can see already it's starting to granulate a wee bit. I like to use rough paper mostly. I do sometimes use a smooth pressed paper, but I like rough because it gives you this sort of rough granulated effect. And also ultramarine blue, it's got sort of some granulation to it, so it does create this effect, and it's really nice for skies and things like that, and particularly nice for this technique. Now I'd really like this to be quite textured, so if I want it to be really textured, then I would put the salt on while it's at this stage, while it's still really glossy wet. If you wanted it to be a lot smoother, more maybe like this one, you would wait until it was a bit drier. So I've just got some salt in here, it's just sea salt, and I'm just going to sprinkle that on. And you can see, and what actually happens is the salt absorbs some of the paint and it leaves white reveal underneath, and that's what gives it this sort of mottled effect. It's really good for doing sand effects or pebbles on a beach, you know, lots of things like that. Really nice for different backgrounds. So that's all you do, and then you would have to leave that till it was completely dry, and then you just brush the salt off and you're left with this really nice effect. So this is one that I prepared earlier, and you can see some really nice effects that the salt's given it. Lots of granulation and lots of different things. Sometimes I put different colours on as well to get a different effect, but because I just want this to sort of replicate the sky, I've left it blue. And I've just sketched in a very basic thistle here and a bumblebee because they're very popular at the moment, and I thought that would be a really nice place to start. So I usually, this is from a photograph, but you can get lots of images, and I'm sure you've got thistles growing somewhere outside, and we see bumblebees all the time, don't we? Thankfully. So I'm just going to get my brushes out. I have some kitchen roll at the ready just to dab off if I need to, and I'm going to start off with a small roundish brush, and I'm just going to put in the green stem and the leaves here. I'm going to paint this really quite loosely. I don't want it to be too perfect. And I sometimes use this sort of angled shader brush, and I've got some liner brushes and things like that. So have a variety of brushes around. You'll get used to what brushes you prefer, but just do it as you're going along. So I'll get that nice detailed brush again, and we'll put some nice greens. Excuse me, I'm just mixing the colour here. So what I find with any green is if you mix a wee bit of brown in with green, it'll make it an earthy tone, so it's a lot more of a natural colour than going in with some of the greens that you get can be a bit bright and they look unrealistic. So I'll just put some of these brushes down. So here we are. I'm just going to do the stem, and I'm just literally painting that in, giving it a coat. So I'm using quite a lot of water on here, and I'm coming in. I'll zoom in a wee bit so you can see it a bit better. And we're doing the thistle, so I'll just move the thistle up a bit for now. Okay, so what I usually do is I just give it a base coat of colour first, just roughly, and then I go over it and drop colour in as I'm going along. Might have another bit coming up here and around here. There we go. So we've just put a very basic flat colours in there for now. So I'm just going to take a darker bluey colour here and just drop some of these colours in. There we are, that's a bit of a darker one. And I like the colours to sort of mingle in with each other, and it just gives it a really nice effect. And that's the thing about watercolours, if you keep it quite wet and allow the colours to flow into one another, you do get these nice effects from them. Let's have a look. We could have it that this is the lighter side so that it's catching the light a wee bit, and maybe on some of these bits of leaves that are coming that way. That's that yellow, we'll put a bit of that up there too. And I usually just do a rough sketch and then I put some of the finer detail in as I'm going along. Every time you do a watercolour, because it's a medium that you can't really control fully, you get really nice different effects each time, and that's what's really nice about it. It's really interesting to see what shapes and what comes of all the different colours that you put together and how they intermingle with each other. Put a bit of the dark in there. And I don't mind if it sort of blends in or bleeds into other colours. In fact, that's really the effect I'm looking for. So I'm just really doing it very wet at the moment, and I'll go in a bit with a more of a damper brush later on, but at the moment I just want to get some of these colours to blend together a bit. And we'll just bring one or two up here like that. So I'll just get a bit more green, I think, and let those all bleed in together. Let's have a bit. There we are. just come down that side like that. A bit more up here. There we are. So I'm just allowing that all to just bleeding together. Let's make this a bit darker. There we go. Put that underneath. Okay, so we've got the main stem of the thistle, and you can see, you know, you don't have to be an absolutely fabulous artist. It's really just like colouring in for adults, but you're doing it with paint. So the biggest tip I can give you with watercolour is keep it wet. It's watercolour. Okay, I'm just going to bring this off the page a wee bit because I don't like flower stem just to stop like that. Okay, so I'll just pull that down a bit. Now, this is the main bowl of the thistle, and this is where all that lovely purple flower is. And of course, you know, this is our national flower, and people love thistles in Scotland. We love them so much, and you'll see them everywhere if you ever visit here. Not only in the fields, but nearly everything's got thistles on too. So they're very close to my heart. I love them. And I'll just put in pointy bits on there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fill that middle bit with some colour, and I want to start off reasonably light. So because I want it to flow into each other and it's a bigger area, I'm actually going to wet it with water first. So I've just got plain water on my brush. I don't know if you can just see that glinting. There you are, you see. So I'm just going to fill that whole bowl there with water. That. And you might even find that some of the paint from here, like, yes, can you see it? It's just starting to creep in there a wee bit. And then I'm going to put some colours in to flow with one another. I'd like to make this side where my light's coming from, so I'll keep that kind of light. You can always darken, but it's harder to get it back light, so it's better to keep things light to begin with, and you can darken as you go. And we'll just darken that up just a touch. Now, I feel like it's a bit light now, so I'm going to be a bit braver, and I'm going to put a bit of dark in there. Get a bit more green in there. And I'm just tapping it in. And what I'm doing is I'm just encouraging the colours to go into each other. Because of the effect that I've done underneath here, it's also given it a bit of a grainy effect, which is really nice. So, oh dear, that's someone at my door. But never mind. Right, here we go. Sorry about that. It's probably just the postman, and you probably heard my dog barking. Barnum. Right, here we go. So I'll just smooth that down a wee bit as well. There you are. So you can see that it's all blending in together, and it's really rather nice. Sometimes I sprinkle salt into that area as well. In fact, shall we do that? That would be quite nice. But then I can't really work on it until it's dry. So I'll just do that a little bit, and it just gives it some texture. And we'll stay away from that till it's dried off just a bit. But you'll see, there you go. So I'll just drop some in there, like that. Just bring some dark colours round here, a wee bit more. I really should have stopped painting this once I put the salt on, but we'll do a little bit. That's it. I just want to make sure I get plenty colour in there. And this is the lovely thing about any kind of art, is that there's no road. You can do what you want. So I decided to change my mind a little and put salt in here, which wasn't what I'd intended to do at the start. So it's really nice that it's open to doing that. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start doing the nice purple flowery bit on the top here. When this is dry, I usually pull some spiky bits out of here too, so we'll show you that also. Right, so the bit on the top here is really quite fluffy, so I'm using a thin liner brush here. I don't know if you can see that really well, and it's sometimes called a rigger, but it's a small thin brush like that. So I'll just pull that down a wee bit more so you can see. And I'm going to go into sort of purples and magenta type colours just to get the nice purple of the thistle. And like I said, always start off with your lighter colours first and build up the colours, because what you don't want is to end up that you've got nowhere to go because you've gone so dark. Now I'm not wetting this first, but my brush is quite wet. So I'm using quite a damp brush, and all I'm going to do is flick these up like this, really randomly. You can see that I'm not, you don't want to be too careful with this. And the other nice thing to do is just to pull some of the colour that you've just done on your thistle bowl up into it as well, and it gives it some depth at the base here. Go right up to the bumblebee, a very big bumblebee. And you can see, so you can move your work around, you know. I quite like pulling these kind of strokes towards me. And you want it to be really quite full. Turn it round again. There we are. And just lots and lots and lots of strokes until you feel it's nice and full and how you'd want it to be. So I think that's enough with the pink, and I'm going to go in fact what I might do is just dab that off with the tissue, and this absorbs some of the paint, so it just lightens it a wee bit. So that's just given me a little bit of lighter colour in there. Can you see? Doesn't matter about that texture, in fact that actually adds to it. So now I'm going to go in with a darker purple colour. Nice dark purple. It's definitely more of a bluey purple. And pull those up. You see there's a bit of a difference in colour. I usually go in with a few different colours so that I get a nice variation. And try and keep it just a wee bit darker down in that base, because down in the base is where there won't be very much light. Let's do the odd darker one here, just just in that base there, I'll just drop a few dark bits like that. Let's see if I can bring that light over a bit more. I hope you can see it. There we are, I think that's just a wee bit better. And I'm just pulling up some of these really darker colours now, which is a bit more purple. And they are sort of, you get some that are really purple, some are more on the pink side. Thistles do tend to be all different. There you go. So we've done as much as I want to do at the moment with that. I want to start doing the bumblebee because his legs come into the flower, and I want to put some of the petals, if you like, we could call this bit the petals, over his legs. So I thought if I start doing the bumblebee, we can carry on with this afterwards. Right, so Mr. Bumblebee. I very rarely use black in watercolour. I usually use either Payne's Grey or an indigo and brown and Payne's Grey mix, and that gives you a really nice sort of darkish colour. So I know that these ones here are quite dark, so I'm just going to, in fact I'll just change brushes again and go in with that small detail brush. I've got my bit of tissue at the side here and I just keep wiping my brush off onto there. I think what we'll do is we'll just wet some of this a wee bit and we'll get a bit more of a wet and wet effect. And I'll just go in with that and we'll pull some of the colours out. So there you go. And I think he's got a bit of dark there too. And you can see those colours kind of blending a bit. I'm just going to put a nice light wash over the wings, and I think I'm going to go for a very pale sort of lilac colour there, just so that you can see them. That's maybe too light. Yeah, you can't see that one at all, so I'll just go slightly darker so that you can see that. And the wings, you can usually see all the wee veins and things like that, so we'll try and replicate that as best we can. So we'll just get the wings in here like that. In fact, what I think I'm going to do is, if I wet the wings, if I wet them down, and then I'm going to dab out with my tissue, so you can use it kind of as an eraser. So I'd like these wings to be much lighter than the body of the bumblebee. So if we just put the water in like that and just work it in slightly, then we can get our tissue, and you just sort of dab that in, give it a good press like that, and can you see it's lifted the colour out? So that's another way, it's kind of like an eraser. So sometimes if you can still work while you're wet and wet, you can erase any mistakes out in the beginning that you start off with. So that's quite good actually, because then they are a wee bit lighter, and I can put my lilac-y colour on there, and hopefully it'll just show that it is slightly different. It does, just a tiny bit of difference. There we go. There we are. And then let's make the bumblebee yellow part, the stripy bit. So I'll just and he's quite fluffy, so I don't want a real crisp edge there. I want it to be kind of ruffled up a little bit. So you can just sort of go in, you don't need to even be too careful. And I quite like the idea with watercolour that the colours mingle into each other. So don't be scared to allow them to run into each other. Just a bit more water in here. Remember, we're doing wet and wet, and we want to keep that nice and wet. There we are, and put that, so just along that edge I'm just going to pick it out. You can still see my pencil marks a wee bit. Don't worry about that, I actually drew it in more than it probably would have, than I would have normally done it a lot lighter, but I wanted you to be able to see what it was that I'd actually drawn. So just make sure that you use a much lighter pencil when you're sketching in, like that. So that's the start of him in there, and I'm just going to, now this part here I know is quite dark, so but I want to put a highlight within the eye. So what I'm going to do is just lift out the eye, a bit like we did before. So I've just put water in there, and I'm just going to go round and round there, so that I'm just working that in and trying to loosen the colour slightly. I'll use my tissue again and just lift some of that out, because I want to put a nice highlight within that eye. And this is all dark here too. I think actually I'll bring that yellow down a wee bit more to there. That's it. Now he's not just, you know, to give him some texture and what have you, so I'm just going to keep this nice and wet because the colours have stopped running a wee bit. So you can always re-wet like this. Make you a big fat bumblebee. There we go. And I've got some nice orange and some vermilion on here, and I'll just put some other colours in there just to give it a nice bright effect. I'm just going to bring these lights over a wee bit to see if you can see that a bit more. Is that better? It's really difficult to get the lighting correct. There we are. Okay, and I'll put some of that orangey colour in there and in here. Mix in a few different bits. Got a little bit of alizarin crimson there, just to darken that up slightly. And you can see a lot of the time I'm just kind of dotting the paint, I'm not even really painting it on, because I just want the colours to mingle in with each other. There we are. I think I've taken some of that off, but I'll go up like this. Now around his or her head, we'll put that nice colour there. They've got sort of all sorts of bits and bobs going on around there too. There we are. And I'm keeping that eye area kind of just clear at the moment. Gone back in with this thin brush, and I think we'll put just on here some, oh, that one, like that. If we just put some nice spiky bits coming out. And I know they've got long sort of feeder things that they get all the pollen with. So let's have a look. Put that round there. And we'll just make some of the wee spikes, wee fluffy bits there too. And now I've got to be careful here because that wing is there, so I'll just do it a tiny bit until we get that in a bit more, and we'll do lots of nice spiky bits like that. I'll just zoom in a tiny bit more for you so you can see some of the detail that I'm putting in. Now let's see. Got some nice yellow. Now we'll just make that spiky on the end too. There we are. And here, nice and yellow. And on this bit as well. Okay. Now he's got some hairy legs. So one of the legs here like this, and one there. And they've got, I'll put one. Now, I think they've got some white bits on the bottom there. We'll just sort of get the legs in as best we can at the moment. They're quite chunky, it's as if they've been doing a workout, they've got muscles. There we are. So I'm just dropping all these colours in, as you can see, and I'm getting some really nice variations. Can you see where the yellow and the colours have blended together there? And I love that. I think that's all that adds to watercolour. Sometimes I want it to be neater, and I don't want it to be quite as loose as that, but it just depends on what it is you're wanting and you're looking for. So there we go. Now what I might have to do is just let this dry off just a little bit so we can go back and do some darker onto here now. So I've got a bit of dark in my brush, so I might as well just use that, and I'll just sweep some of that up into there. There we are. We'll just come out a wee bit. So I could now just do a bit more work on the leaves, and then we can go back to the bumblebee when he's dried off a wee bit. So that's the best thing to do, is just let areas dry off, especially if you want to stop doing the wet and wet effect and actually put a bit of detail in. Eventually you'll stop it from running, but these colours will continue to run into each other until it's dry, and it will still have that lovely effect. I'll just bring that yellow down a bit more like that, make him nice and fuzzy. A bit more orange in there because I really like the way those colours blend into each other. There we go. And that can all be working together while we're doing the other bit. lighten that slightly. So here we go, and I just wanted to show you, I've brushed all the salt off this paper. Let me just zoom in a wee bit so that you can see. And can you see how it's all gone like speckly and granulated? And that's just with one colour on it. You can see on here it's even more of a reaction. So it just depends. It's one of those random things, you don't exactly know what it's going to look like. But it's really nice, isn't it? And it's nice if you put lots of colours in too. Right, okay, so we're back to the bee, and I brushed off the salt off this middle bit, and you can see it's made it quite textured. And I just went ahead and put a few more spiky bits off my thistle. So I'm going to see if I can work a bit on his eye and everything at the minute. So let's go in here. Now I want to just be aware that there'll be a bit of a highlight in it, so I'm going to just brush it in like that. Let me zoom in a wee bit for you. There we are. And I can maybe just go quite dark. I'll just bring that light round slightly. Is that better? Oh my! I nearly knocked the whole thing off. Oops, there. Okay, so I'm just going to put a bit darker around the edge there. And in the middle, because it is really quite dark, his eye. And maybe just speckles it a bit, especially around the edge. So I think, oops, oh dear, that's a bit too wet I think. I'm just going to dab that off a wee bit, look. I missed out a bit of a highlight there to leave on, but boy, that's keeps banging. There we are. Right. And then what I think I'll do is I'll take just a damp brush and maybe just lift a slight highlight around there. So that's another way of getting an effect, is you just dry your brush off on your tissue like that, and then it's a thirsty brush we call it, and you can actually lift out some colour, and that can give it a nice highlight. There we are. Okay, so I'm going to have a wee look at his wings. Now there's some sort of veins on the wings, so I'm just going to do a tiny bit of Payne's Grey, not too strong. And here's the wings here, so let's just, oh dear, that's too faint, can't see it at all. That's it. You're better to go too light though, because if you go in a bit too dark then you really can't get rid of it. Oh, you can see that just, and I think it is quite faint what you can see of on their wings anyway, so all the wee veins like that. Just there we go, and this got, maybe do this wing at this side just slightly darker because it's just slightly in shadow there, so maybe just do that one a bit darker and put some veins in. That's okay. So I think as well, they actually, I've got a feeling they've got 4 wings. So I might just see if I can add a little bit on here, and that might just make it look there. Okay, so I really like those wings. They're quite cool. Maybe just extend them a bit. Maybe just a wee bit like that. Bring it round. Yeah. I can't remember if they're rounded or pointed. I do have a reference photograph of a bee that I was kind of taking this from. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go and put some nice little fluffy bits coming off of them like this, just to make him really fluffy, really fluffed up. That's it. And this colour that I'm using at the moment, it's not black, it's indigo, and I like to use it quite a lot. I use that in Payne's Grey often, because, oops, the daisy, that was a bit big. we'll just make him a bit more fluffy, I think. Instead of just using flat black, because black can really look quite flat, especially in watercolour. So I very rarely use black. You do get them in the kits, but it's very rare that somebody, I mean, even doing the centres of poppies, I tend to do it indigo and Payne's Grey. So there we go. He's actually got hairy legs too, so I'll maybe just make that a wee bit fluffier up there. There we go. And now there's some white in the bottom area, so I'm just going to put a light bit of this in here just to show that there's something, but I'm sure it's got white too, so that's okay. And then we'll do exactly the same with the yellow. I'm hoping it'll show up. I might have to put just a touch of the orange in just to make that a bit brighter. So, oops, sorry, so we'll just flick up all these here and get some nice fluffy bits. So I've actually swapped to a small detail brush there, can you see? And that's just enabling me to get a bit more precise with this. There we are. I think he's looking very cute. And I think he should have a fluffy belly too. Like that. And definitely a fluffy bottom. A bee's bum. There we go. So, oops. Sometimes you get a bit of a thicker bit, so just use your tissue, you know, to get rid of any little bits you don't want. There we go. Right, now, let's have a look at his legs. So, just thinking that maybe that should have just a hint of that yellowy orange through there. Now, the legs. legs. So let's do that mixture of indigo and Payne's grey. And there's a leg at the back here. So the top part of their leg is it looks like they've got big muscles, and then it kind of comes down like that, but it's really hairy. So I think this is what they catch all the pollen on, actually. So to enable them to collect all the pollen, I think, because I know they get it all in here too, the pollen. So let's just make that just slightly darker, bit of a hairy leg, and the same here. So oops-a-daisy, got a bit dark there. We'll just pull some of these out. Here we go. And I'm not sure if this part's fluffy too, but he's going to be on ours because we want him to be cute. I don't know if it's got hairs on that bit too. So that's 3 legs, and I think we could just pop another leg that looks like it's kind of just coming out there somewhere. That would do, wouldn't it? Yeah. Just make these nice and fluffy, hairy. Maybe give him some little dots of pollen on them too. Okay, so we'll make that one. Oh dear. That'll do. And then, I don't know if he has some, I'm not sure, but put a couple there like that. Yes. Okay, so there we are. Now I'm going to work on this part of the thistle, and it has lots of spiky bits sticking out of there too, quite a dark green, so I'll just mix a nice dark green up there, and I'm just going to kind of pull some really fierce looking spikies out. They go in all different directions. I need to make that quite dark actually, just on this real dark area. So I'm kind of just flicking this out. I'll show you. Let's see if I've got a bit of paper. What I'm actually doing is I'm just putting my brush down like that and then kind of flicking out, trying to get that sort of sticky out bit, you know, like a thorn type idea. So here we go. A few more. I'd imagine there's hundreds of these. Now, I think on this part, maybe it should just be that a little bit lighter. Just because it's on the lighter side. Yeah, that looks a bit better. So it's just a bit of trial and error really, and until you like it, and if it's not working then you can just change it up a bit. So we're not far off done with this, but there's a few more little tips I want to give you before we finish. But I really hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you have a go at it. You could always email me some of your results. I would love to see that. That would just really make my day, that would. Okay, so one of the other things that I do to get highlights within something, so I'll just zoom back out slightly. So here we are, we've got our lovely Thistle and our Bumblebee. Isn't that lovely? I use a craft knife or a hobby knife, you can see, and what I actually do is I scrape out, so can you see, so that we're getting these kind of whitish highlights. I'll zoom back in because it's a wee bit difficult to see, but you can just see where I'm lifting out, just in this area. I might need to just press a bit harder, and I'm just getting one or two. So I sometimes use this for sparkle on water or different things, you know, it can be quite a good way. Oops. Could just maybe get the odd bit here. It's like everything else though, you get a bit carried away and you start saying, oh, I'll just do a bit more here. And before you know it, I wonder if I could maybe just do the odd little highlight on Mr. Bumblebee. Oh yeah, that's quite nice. Maybe just the odd little hair, just so he looks, just catching the light, some of that. You actually have to really make sure that it's very dry when you do it, and some of mine is still slightly wet, so, but I just wanted to share that wee tip with you before we go today. A few speckles on here, a little bit of highlight. I wonder if maybe I shouldn't have. See, I'm starting to get carried away. Right, leave it alone. Maybe just. Yes, he's supposed to be. I've got quite a white little bit on the bottom there. Okay, so you get the idea, and you can do it as much as you want. If you end up that you've taken too much out, you can paint over it. So don't worry too much if you feel that you've gone a bit too far, like me. There we are. So I really hope you've enjoyed spending time with me this afternoon, and I hope that you'll come and join me in my studio again. Check out all my other videos. I'm trying to get as many up there, just short ones, as I possibly can to keep you busy. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.